My Uncle Greg sneered at my cute little job during his toast, demanding the family applaud his son Max's real estate empire instead. They pity-clapped, unaware I was the landlord approving Max's lease, and that I was holding the eviction notice he didn't know was coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The room was spinning before I even picked up the phone. I was lying on my bathroom floor, the cool tile pressing against my feverish cheek, waiting for the latest wave of nausea to pass. It wasn't just the flu, it was exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your marrow after 3 years of working 14-hour days without a single break. I had built something massive, something incredible, but the cost had been my health and my social life. My phone buzzed on the bath mat next to me. The screen lit up with a photo of Aunt Linda, a picture taken 5 years ago when we were still close, before the comparison started. Before Max became the family's golden deity and I became the cautionary tale. I groaned, reaching out a trembling hand to swipe the green icon. "Hello?" My voice was a wreck, raspy and weak. "Amelia, you sound terrible," Linda's voice chirped, though there was no real warmth in it. It was the tone people use when they want to verify you're doing poorly so they can feel better about themselves. "Are you still in bed? It's 2 in the afternoon." "I have the flu, Linda," I managed, pulling myself up to sit against the bathtub. "I've been sick for 3 days." "Oh, well, that's a shame," she said, breezing past it instantly. "Listen, we're having a celebratory dinner tonight at the Gilded Oak. You know, that place you probably can't get into. Greg pulled some strings. It's for Max." I closed my eyes, the headache pounding behind my temples. "Max, is it his birthday?" "No, don't be silly," she laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "He's just closed on his new penthouse, a massive real estate acquisition. Greg is so proud. We all are. He's finally made it to the big leagues, Amelia, real wealth, not just whatever it is you do." The dig was subtle, practiced. It was a needle slid specifically between my ribs. For years, I had kept my business quiet. I operated under a generic LLC, kept my name off the flashy billboards, and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment while I reinvested every cent. To them, I was Amelia the freelance consultant, struggling to make rent, driving a 5-year-old sedan. To the business world, I was the majority shareholder of Apex Holdings, a property management firm that had quietly acquired 40% of the luxury residential market in the city. "I'm happy for him," I lied, my stomach churning. "But I'm really not up for it, Linda. I'm contagious." "Amelia," her tone hardened. "Greg specifically asked for you. He wants the whole family there. He thinks it would be instructive for you to see what success looks like. Besides, we're paying. I know things are tight for you right now." The condescension was so thick I could almost taste it, metallic and bitter. They wanted me there as a prop. I was the before picture to Max's after. I was the designated loser at the table to make Max's victory shine brighter. "I really can't," I whispered. "If you don't come," Linda said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "Greg is going to cut your dad off. He said if you can't show basic respect for the family's success, he sees no reason to continue covering your dad's care facility costs." The air left my lungs. My father was in assisted living, suffering from early-onset dementia. Uncle Greg, his younger brother, had volunteered to handle the finances years ago when Dad first got sick, claiming he had invested Dad's savings well. I had suspected for a long time that Greg held that money over our heads like a weapon, but I never thought he'd use it like this. "He wouldn't," I said, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles turned white. "Try him," Linda said simply. 7:00 p.m. Don't be late. And dress nice, Amelia. Try to look like you belong." She hung up. I sat there on the cold floor, the silence of the bathroom deafening. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury in my stomach. They weren't just insulting me anymore. They were threatening my father's well-being to force me into a humiliation ritual. I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. Pale, sweaty, dark circles under my eyes. I looked weak. I looked exactly like the failure they thought I was. But as I stared, a thought crystallized in my mind. Max's real estate acquisition. The gilded oak, the timing. I stood up, gripping the sink for support. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. They were using my father's vulnerability. Why to drag me to an execution, unaware that I was the one holding the axe? I spent the next hour in a daze of mechanical preparation. I forced myself to drink a glass of water, took 2 extra-strength painkillers, and stepped into a scalding shower. The heat helped loosen the tension in my shoulders, but it couldn't touch the ice in my veins. As I scrubbed, my mind replayed the last decade of my life. The missed holidays because I was overseeing renovations. The dates I'd canceled to handle emergency plumbing issues in my units. The relentless, grinding pressure of building a portfolio from scratch with no safety net. Uncle Greg and Aunt Linda had never once asked how I was surviving. They just assumed that because I didn't flash a Rolex or drive a Porsche, I was drowning. They equated spending with earning. It was their fatal flaw. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around myself, walking into my bedroom. It was sparse, clean, and functional. I didn't have expensive art on the walls because I preferred liquidity in the bank. I opened my closet and pushed past the comfortable sweaters I usually wore, reaching for the back. I pulled out a structured black blazer and a pair of tailored trousers. They were expensive, high-quality wool, perfectly fitted but understated. No logos, no flash, just power. I sat at my small vanity to apply makeup, covering the pallor of my sickness with foundation and rouge. I needed armor. As I applied mascara, my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from my dedicated server at Apex Holdings. A standard daily digest of new lease agreements and pending move-ins for the month. I paused, the mascara wand hovering in midair. Max's penthouse. Linda had said he closed on it. In Greg's vocabulary, that usually meant bought. But Max didn't have the credit score to buy a pack of gum, let alone a penthouse in the city's most exclusive district. He was an influencer with 50,000 bot followers and a lifestyle funded entirely by Greg's credit cards. I opened my laptop, ignoring the throbbing in my head. I logged into my admin portal. My fingers flew across the keys, searching for the property records. The Obsidian Tower. That was the newest ultra-luxury development downtown. My company, through a shell corporation, had finalized the acquisition of the building's management rights and 40% of the units 3 months ago. It was the jewel in my crown, the deal that had nearly killed me with stress. I searched the tenant database for the name Max. Nothing. I frowned. Had he actually bought a unit? If he bought it, he wouldn't be in my tenant portal. But the units in the Obsidian started at $4 million. Greg had money, he owned a chain of car dealerships, but he didn't have $4 million cash money, and interest rates were sky high. I searched Greg. Nothing. Then I searched by unit number. Linda had posted a photo of the view on Facebook an hour ago, bragging. Based on the angle of the skyline, it was a corner unit, likely the 40th floor or higher. I pulled up the pending applications for Unit 4201. There it was. Applicant Maxwell P. Henderson, cosigner Gregory Henderson, status pending conditional approval, lease type 12-month rental. I stared at the screen, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. He hadn't bought it. He was renting it. And not only was he renting it, but the application was flagged. I clicked on the notes. Flagged by underwriting, applicant's proof of income is insufficient. Bank statements show erratic deposits. Cosigner debt-to-income ratio is borderline, requesting double security deposit and 6 months rent up front. I scrolled down further. There was a scanned document attached, a letter from Greg on his dealership letterhead, practically begging for an extension on the deposit, citing liquidity movement and promising the funds by next Friday. They were broke, or at least cash poor and leveraging everything to maintain the illusion of wealth. And here they were, throwing a dinner to rub my nose in a purchase that was actually a rental application hanging by a thread. I looked at the Approve Deny button at the bottom of the screen. As the majority owner, I had override privileges. I could reject them right now with a single click. But that would be too easy. That would be mercy. I closed the laptop gently. The painkillers were kicking in, dulling the physical ache, but the emotional clarity was razor sharp. I stood up and looked in the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't the sick, struggling niece anymore. She was the shark in the water, and they had just decided to go for a swim while bleeding. They had forgotten one crucial thing. You should never insult the person who holds the keys to your house. To understand why I went to that dinner, you have to understand the history. You have to understand that I loved them once. When I was 22, fresh, out of college and terrified, Uncle Greg was my hero. My father had just had his first stroke, and our world collapsed. Greg stepped in, the big, boisterous savior. He drove a Mercedes, wore Italian suits that strained at the buttons, and spoke with the confidence of a man who owned the world. "Don't worry, Millie," he had told me, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Family takes care of family. I'll handle your dad's accounts. You just focus on whatever little job you can find." I was grateful, so grateful that I ignored the way he dismissed my degree in finance. I ignored the way he made jokes about women in business being cute. For 3 years, I practically worked as an unpaid intern for his dealership on weekends, organizing his chaotic filing systems, digitizing his records, fixing the messes he made. I saved him thousands of dollars in tax penalties. I found embezzling employees he hadn't noticed. And how did he repay me? When I came to him with my first business plan, a small, foolproof strategy to flip a duplex, he laughed until he choked on his scotch. "Stick to spreadsheets, honey," he'd said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Real estate is a wolf's game, you're a hamster." He gave the money I needed to Max instead. Max, who used it to invest in a cryptocurrency scam and lost it all in 3 weeks. Greg never scolded him. He just shrugged and said, "You gotta spend money to learn the game." That was the turning point. I stopped asking for help. I stopped sharing my life. I went underground and built my empire brick by brick, fueled by a mixture of caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. I pulled my car up to the valet stand at the Gilded Oak. It was a pretentious spot, all velvet ropes and gold leaf, designed for people who wanted to be seen spending money rather than actually enjoying a meal. I handed my keys to the valet, a kid who looked about 19. My car was a Toyota Camry, reliable, invisible. "Keep it close," I said, handing him a 20. "I won't be staying long." Inside, the restaurant hummed with the sound of silverware on china and performative laughter. I spotted them immediately. They had the center table, of course. Uncle Greg was holding court. He had aged in the last year, his face was redder, puffier. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, a blue that clashed with the decor. He was gesturing wildly with a fork, a piece of steak impaled on the end. Next to him was Aunt Linda, nodding rhythmically, her face frozen in a Botoxed smile of permanent agreement. She was the enabler, the one who smoothed over Greg's cruelty and called it honesty. And then there was Max. My cousin sat leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the back, looking bored. He was wearing sunglasses indoors. At night, he had a branding t-shirt on under a blazer, the logo for his real estate masterclass visible on the chest. He was checking his phone, scrolling through TikTok, completely ignoring his father's speech. Max was 32, 2 years younger than me, but he acted like a teenager. He had never worked a real job in his life. He bounced from DJ to life coach to crypto expert, and now, apparently, real estate tycoon. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked toward the table. Greg saw me first. His eyes scanned me up and down, looking for a flaw, a loose thread, a sign of poverty. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," he boomed, his voice carrying over the quiet murmurs of the restaurant. Heads turned. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my expression neutral. "Hello, Uncle Greg, Aunt Linda. Max," I said, taking the empty seat opposite them. "You look tired," Linda said immediately, reaching out to pat my hand before recoiling slightly, as if remembering I was contagious. "Is that the same blazer you wore to Christmas 2 years ago?" "It's a classic," I said calmly. "It lasts." "If you say so," Max snorted, finally looking up from his phone. He lowered his sunglasses to peer at me. "You look like you're going to a funeral, Amelia. Lighten up. Tonight is a celebration." "That's right." Greg slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Tonight is about winners, winners like my boy here." He wrapped a thick arm around Max's neck, shaking him playfully. Max looked annoyed but allowed it. "Tell her, Max, tell her about the penthouse," Greg commanded, looking at me with a predatory gleam in his eyes. He wasn't sharing news, he was deploying a weapon. "It's sick," Max said, leaning forward. "Top floor of the Obsidian, floor-to-ceiling glass, smart home integration. The works. I'm moving in next week. Going to use it as the HQ for my new content house." "Content house?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Yeah," Max smirked. "I'm launching a series on how to dominate the property market, showing people how to live the high life. You know, visualizing success to manifest reality." "Manifesting," I repeated. "Is that how you paid for it?" The table went silent for a split second. Greg's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, Amelia," Greg growled, his jovial mask slipping instantly. "Max paid for it with hustle. Something you wouldn't know about, pushing pencils in whatever cubicle you're hiding in." "I'm just asking," I said innocently, picking up the menu. "Did you buy it?" "We're closing the deal," Greg interjected quickly, too quickly. "The paperwork is a formality, but the keys are practically in his hand. It's a multi-million-dollar asset, Amelia, more than you'll see in a lifetime." He leaned in, his breath smelling of scotch and onions. "You could learn a lot from him, you know. Instead of being bitter, maybe you should take notes. Max is generous. Maybe he'd let you come clean the place for him, get a taste of the luxury lifestyle." Linda giggled nervously. Max smirked. I looked at Greg. I looked at his sweaty forehead, his cheap suit, the desperation hiding behind his arrogance. I looked at Max, the fraud who believed his own hype. I felt a vibrating in my pocket. It was my phone, another email notification. Subject: Urgent Compliance Warning, Unit 4201, Obsidian Tower. I didn't need to look at it to know what it said. My automated system flagged applications that remained in pending status without funds for more than 48 hours. "I'll keep that in mind," I said softly. "I'm always looking to learn about asset management." "Good," Greg grunted, satisfied that he had put me in my place. "Now, order something. But don't go crazy, I'm not paying for the lobster for someone who didn't earn it." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd cracked all day. "I'll just have the water," I said. "I have a feeling I won't be hungry for long." The appetizer arrived, a tower of seafood on a silver platter that looked like it cost more than my first car. Greg didn't wait for anyone else to start. He reached out, grabbed a lobster claw, and cracked it loudly, sending a spray of juice across the pristine white tablecloth. "Dig in," he grunted, his mouth full. "Don't be shy, Amelia. I know you're not used to eating like this." I took a sip of my water, the ice clinking softly against the glass. Under the table, my phone was resting on my knee. I had lowered the brightness to the minimum, but the information displayed on the screen was illuminating enough. While Greg was busy dissecting the crustacean and lecturing the waiter on the proper temperature of the butter, I was logging into the backend of Apex Holdings' secure server. I needed to see exactly how deep this lie went. It wasn't just about the rental application anymore. It was about the audacity of the fraud. I tapped into the Documents tab of Max's application. There were 3 PDF uploads: proof of income, bank statement, OCT, and reference letter. I opened the bank statement first. On the surface, it looked legitimate. It showed a checking account balance of $245,000. Impressive for someone who, to my knowledge, had spent the last 6 months making TikToks about hustle culture from his parents' basement. But I zoomed in. I've looked at thousands of financial documents over the last decade. I know the fonts banks use. I know the pixelation that occurs when a legitimate PDF is generated versus when an image is pasted onto a background. The numbers in the balance column were in Arial. The rest of the document was in Helvetica. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. It wasn't just a lie, it was a crime. He had doctored the statement. I swiped to the metadata tab of the file. Created yesterday 11:42 p.m. Software, Canva web export. I almost laughed out loud. He had used a graphic design website to forge a bank statement to defraud a landlord. If I weren't the landlord, he might have gone to jail for wire fraud. Since I was the landlord, he was just walking into a buzzsaw. "You're not eating," Linda observed, her voice sharp. She was picking at a shrimp cocktail, her eyes darting around the room to see who was watching us. "Is the food not to your liking, or are you just trying to make a scene by starving yourself?" "I'm just admiring the view," I said, looking directly at Max. He was busy taking a selfie with the lobster tower, making a duck face that made him look ridiculous. "Max, I'm curious. The underwriting process for the Obsidian is notoriously strict. My friend knows someone in the industry. She said they require 3 times the monthly rent in verified liquid assets. That must have been a lot of cash to move around." Max froze, the phone lowered slightly. Behind his sunglasses, I saw a flicker of panic. "I have investors," Max said quickly, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "Silent partners, they back my brand." "Investors," I repeated, dragging the word out. "So the money in your account isn't yours?" "It's my liquidity," Greg interrupted, pointing a buttery finger at me. "I transferred a bridge loan to his account to help with the closing costs. That's how business works, Amelia. You move capital, you leverage assets, but I wouldn't expect you to understand high-level finance." "A bridge loan," I said, tapping my finger on the table. "Interesting, because usually banks frown on using borrowed funds for a down payment unless it's disclosed." "It's disclosed," Greg snapped, his face turning a shade of crimson that matched the lobster. "Everything is above board. Why are you grilling him? You should be congratulating him." I looked back down at my phone. I navigated to the reference letter. It was signed by a CEO of Technova, a company I had never heard of. I quickly opened a new tab and Googled Technova. The only result was a dissolved LLC in Delaware from 2012. "I'm just fascinated, Uncle Greg," I said, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. "It's not every day my cousin buys a $4 million penthouse. I just want to know the details so I can learn." "Then listen instead of asking stupid questions," Greg spat. He turned back to the waiter. "Bring us a bottle of the 08 Cabernet, the expensive one, and bring another glass for my son. He has a lot to celebrate." I texted my VP of Operations, Sarah. "Me, pull the file for Unit 4201. Verify the employment reference. I want a verbal confirmation within 10 minutes. Also, flag the application for immediate fraud review." "Sarah, on a Sunday night, you're the boss, give me 5. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for it to snap shut. The wine arrived, and Greg made a show of swirling it, sniffing it, and proclaiming it passable, even though I knew he couldn't tell the difference between a vintage Cabernet and grape juice left out in the sun. He poured a glass for Max, then Linda, then himself. He didn't offer me any. "To the Henderson legacy," Greg toasted, raising his glass high. "To Max, who has finally put our name on the map, and to those who doubted us." He cast a sneering glance in my direction. May they enjoy their mediocrity. They clinked glasses. The sound rang through the restaurant like a bell signaling the start of a boxing match. "So Max," I said, my voice cutting through the moment of self-congratulation, "when do you get the deed?" Max choked on his wine. He coughed, wiping a drop of red liquid from his chin. "The what?" "The deed," I said calmly. "You said you bought the place. When you close on a property, you get a deed, or at least a title transfer document. When is the closing date?" It's a rolling close," Max stammered, looking at his father for help. "It's a new type of contract, very exclusive." "A rolling close," I said, letting a small laugh escape. "I've heard of rent-to-own, I've heard of lease options. I've never heard of a rolling close on a luxury condo. Are you sure you're not just renting it, Max?" The table went dead silent. Even Linda stopped chewing. Greg set his wine glass down with a heavy thud. The liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth blood red. "What did you just say?" Greg whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I asked if he was renting," I said, holding his gaze. "Because the way he's describing it, the investors, the bridge loan, the lack of a closing date, it sounds like a tenant application, Uncle Greg, not a purchase." "You jealous little witch," Greg hissed. He leaned across the table, his face inches from the centerpiece. "Just because you live in a shoebox, you can't stand to see him win. You think the Obsidian rents to just anyone? You think they let people in without millions in the bank? Even if he was renting, which he isn't, he'd still be living in a place you couldn't even afford to step foot in." "Actually," I said, "I know for a fact they don't rent to just anyone. They have a very strict vetting process. They check for things like forged bank statements." Max's face went pale. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were wide with terror. He knew that I knew, but he didn't understand how. "You're crazy," Max muttered. "Dad, she's crazy. Let's just kick her out." "No," I said, raising my voice slightly. "I'm not crazy, Max. I'm observant. You used Canva to edit that PDF. You didn't even flatten the layers properly. If an underwriter looks at that file for more than 10 seconds, they're going to see the edit history." "You don't know what you're talking about," Greg shouted. A few people at nearby tables turned to look, whispering. "You've never seen $1 million in your life. You think you can sit here and slander my son." "I'm not slandering him," I said. "I'm trying to save him from a felony fraud charge. Because if that application goes through to the legal department, they will prosecute." "Stop it," Linda shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "Just stop it, Amelia. Why are you doing this? Why can't you, Jay? Us be happy for us." "Because it's a lie, Linda," I snapped, my patience finally fraying. "It's all a lie. He didn't buy it. He's trying to rent it. And he's faking the money to do it. And you," I looked at Greg, "you're enabling it. You wrote a letter promising funds you don't have. I saw the letter regarding the liquidity movement. You asked for an extension on the security deposit. If you bought the place, why would you need a security deposit?" The logic hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Greg's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at Max, waiting for an explanation, waiting for his son to tell him I was wrong. But Max just stared at his empty plate, defeated. Max started, his voice small. "I told them I needed to rent for a year before buying, for tax purposes." "See," Greg latched onto the excuse like a drowning man grabbing a life raft. "Tax purposes, it's a strategy. God, you're stupid, Amelia. It's a lease option. It's practically a purchase." "It's a rental application," I corrected, "and it's failing." My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Sarah verified. The CEO of Technova is Max's old college roommate. I called the number. He answered, "Yo, who dis? We have him on tape. Want me to kill the deal?" I looked at the text, then up at Greg. He was breathing heavily, his face purple. He looked like he was about to explode. "You listen to me," Greg growled, his voice dropping to a menacing rumble. "You keep your mouth shut about this. You don't tell Grandma, you don't tell the cousins. Max bought that place. End of story. And if you say one more word..." I swear to God, Amelia, I'll make you regret it. Is that a threat? I asked softly. It's a promise, he sneered. You know, Greg said, leaning back and trying to regain his composure, though his hands were shaking. I was going to be nice. I was going to pay for your dinner. I was going to let you stay in the family trust. But now I think it's time for some tough love. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the nursing home tomorrow, he said, staring at me with dead, shark-like eyes. I'm going to tell them that the funds have dried up. I'm going to stop the payments for your father. The world seemed to stop spinning. The sounds of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. You can't do that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's his money, you're just the executor. I have power of attorney, Greg shouted, not caring who heard him now. I control the assets, and if I decide the market took a downturn and his portfolio is wiped out, well, that's just bad luck, isn't it? He'll have to move to a state facility, or maybe you can take him in that little apartment of yours. He smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile of a man who thought he held all the cards. Apologize, he demanded. Apologize to Max. Apologize to me. Admit you're jealous. Admit you're a failure. And maybe, I won't throw your father out on the street next week. I looked at Linda. She looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. She was going to let him do it. She was going to let him leverage my dying father's safety to protect her son's fragile ego. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, metallic click of a safety being disengaged. You're not going to call the nursing home, Greg, I said. My voice was steady now. Cold, clinical. The sickness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated focus. Oh, I'm not, he laughed mockingly. Watch me. You're not, I continued. Because if you do, the IRS is going to be very interested in why you've been using Dad's account to pay for the lease payments on your Mercedes for the last 3 years. Greg froze. His finger hovered over his phone screen. I know about the skimming, I said. I know about the management fees you charge the trust. I've known for a long time. I didn't say anything because I wanted to keep the peace. But you just declared war. You have no proof, he stammered, but the confidence was draining out of him rapidly. I have copies of every transaction, I lied, well, partially. I had suspected it, but his reaction confirmed it. But that's not the only reason you're going to stop. I picked up my phone. I opened the Apex Holdings owner app. I navigated to the Approve Deny screen for Unit 4201. You keep telling me to learn from Max's success, I said, standing up. You keep telling me to look at the real estate empire. Well, let's look at it. I turned the phone around and placed it in the center of the table, right next to the lobster. The screen was bright. It showed the full application details. Property, the Obsidian Tower, Unit 4201. Applicant, Maxwell P. Henderson. Status, pending review. Owner-manager override. Active. What is this? Max asked, squinting at the screen. How do you have the admin view? Look at the bottom, I said, pointing to the signature line for the lessor. It didn't say, the Obsidian Management. It said, Apex Holdings LLC. And right below that, in smaller print, authorized signatory, Amelia J. Vance, CEO. Apex Holdings, I said clearly. That's my company, Greg. I own the management firm, and through a series of holding companies, I own 40% of the Obsidian. Greg stared at the phone. He blinked once, twice. His brain was trying to process the information, but it was jamming. You, he rasped, you own the building. I'm his landlord, I said, looking at Max. Or I was going to be. I reached out and tapped the screen. I hit the big red button marked Deny. A pop-up appeared, Reason for Rejection. I typed in one word, narrating as I did so, FRAUD. I hit Submit. The screen flashed green, Application Denied. Notification sent to applicant. A second later, Max's phone pinged loudly on the table. He picked it up, staring at the notification. His face crumbled. Denied, Max whispered. She denied me. "You can't do that," Greg screamed, jumping to his feet. His chair flew back and hit the floor with a crash. The entire restaurant fell silent. "We had a deal, we had an agreement." "You had an application," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "And you lied on it. You forged documents. You tried to defraud my company. And then you threatened my father." I leaned in close, resting my hands on the table. "The game is over, Uncle Greg, and you didn't just lose, you got evicted." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the gilded oak was the soft hum of the HVAC system and the distant clink of a glass from the bar. Then Greg exploded. "You are a liar," he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered ugly. He kicked the chair that was already on the floor, sending it skidding into the path of a waiter carrying a tray of martinis. The waiter yelped, dancing out of the way, but the tray tipped, sending glass shattering against the hardwood. "Sir, I need you to calm down," the waiter stammered, backing away. "Don't tell me to calm down," Greg roared, turning on the poor staff member. "This woman is a fraud, she's lying, she's a receptionist who thinks she can play big shot." He turned back to me, his chest heaving. "You own the building, you drive a 5-year-old Toyota, you live in a rent-controlled dump. You think anyone here believes you own a $400 million asset?" "I own the company that owns the asset," I corrected calmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, looking up at him. It was a power dynamic I had learned in boardrooms. The person who stays calm controls the room. "And my car is paid for, Greg, is yours." "Don't you talk to me about money," he spat, veins bulging in his neck. "I have provided for this family, I have carried the weight, and you ungrateful little." He lunged toward the table, grabbing the edge as if to flip it. Linda shrieked, covering her mouth. Max just sat there, staring at his phone screen where the words application DENIED were still glowing. He looked like a child whose ice cream had fallen in the dirt, confused, betrayed, and utterly useless. Two large men in dark suits, the restaurant's security, materialized from the shadows near the entrance. They moved with the swift, silent purpose of professionals. "Is there a problem here?" the lead security officer asked, stepping between Greg and the table. "Yes, there's a problem," Greg shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is harassing us. She ruined my son's celebration. I want her removed." The officer looked at me. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table next to the untouched lobster tower. I looked at the officer, then at the restaurant manager, a man named Henry whom I had met several times at Chamber of Commerce events, though Greg didn't know that. Henry was hurrying over, looking mortified. "Ms. Vance," Henry said, his eyes widening as he recognized me. "Is everything all right?" Greg froze, his mouth hung open. You know her." "Ms. Vance is a valued member of the Downtown Business Association," Henry said stiffly, adjusting his cuffs. "And her firm manages the property next door. Is this man bothering you, Ms. Vance?" The color drained from Greg's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. The realization hit him and the entire room at once. I wasn't just some anonymous relative. Here, in this world in the city center, I was a known entity. He was the tourist. "He's my uncle," I said, my voice cool and audible to the tables nearby who were watching with rapt attention. "And he was just leaving. But before he goes, there is one final piece of business." I turned my gaze to Aunt Linda. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Linda," I said softness, "you asked why I couldn't just be happy for you. You asked why I couldn't just play along." "Amelia, please," she whispered. "Don't." "He threatened my father," I said, and my voice hardened into steel. "He threatened to pull the funding for Dad's care. He threatened to leave a man with dementia on the street because his son couldn't handle a rental rejection." A gasp went through the nearby tables. Greg looked around, realizing he was losing the audience. He was losing everything. "I didn't mean it," Greg muttered, backing up a step. It was, heat of the moment. No, I said. It wasn't, because the money isn't yours to pull, Greg, is it? I looked at Max. Max, do you want to know where your investors came from? Do you want to know where the bridge loan for your deposit came from? Shut up, Greg warned, his voice a low growl. Amelia, I am warning you. It came from the Henderson Family Trust, I said loudly. It came from the fund that Grandpa set up for Dad's care, the fund you have power of attorney over. Max looked up at his father, his eyes wide. Dad, you said that was your dealership money. It is my money, Greg shouted, desperate now. I manage it, I invest it, I was going to pay it back. That's called embezzlement, Greg, I said. And I have the transaction logs. I had my forensic accountant pull them this morning when I saw the bank statement Max uploaded. You transferred $50,000 from Dad's care fund to Max's checking account yesterday. You were going to use Dad's life savings to pay the security deposit on a penthouse so your son could pretend to be rich on the internet. You stole from Uncle Jerry, Max whispered, horrifying realization dawning on him. Dad, if that comes out, my brand, the sponsors. Forget your brand, Greg screamed at his son. I did this for you, you ungrateful little parasite. I did everything for you. Sir, the security guard said, placing a heavy hand on Greg's shoulder. It's time to go. Get your hands off me, Greg shook him off, adjusting his jacket. He tried to summon one last shred of dignity. He looked at me, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you've won? You think you're smart? You've destroyed this family, Amelia. I hope you're happy. You'll never see a dime of that money again. I'll burn it all before I let you touch it. You won't have the chance, I said, picking up my glass of water. My lawyer filed an emergency injunction this afternoon. Your access to the accounts was frozen an hour ago, and the police are likely waiting at your house to discuss the discrepancies in the dealership's tax filings, too. I found those while I was digging. Greg stared at me. He looked small now. The bluster was gone, replaced by the terrifying clarity of a man watching his life disintegrate in real time. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out, the security guards flanking him. Linda sat there for a moment longer, looking at the empty chair, then at me. She looked like she wanted to say something, an apology, an excuse, a plea, but she found nothing. She grabbed her purse and ran after her husband. Max was the last to leave. He stood up slowly. He looked at the lobster tower, then at me. I didn't know, he said quietly. About the money, I didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. You were too busy manifesting. He flinched. He put his sunglasses back on, trying to hide his eyes, and walked out of the restaurant, his shoulders slumped. I was left alone at the table. The restaurant was quiet. Henry, the manager, stepped forward. Ms. Vance, he said softly, I am so sorry. Please allow us to comp the meal, and can I get you anything else? I looked at the chaotic mess of the table. The spilled wine, the overturned chair, the excessive display of wealth that was all built on a lie. No thank you, Henry, I said, placing a $100 bill on the table for the waiter who had been pushed. I'm actually not hungry anymore. I think I'm just going to go home. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely necessary. The next morning, I wasn't at Apex Holdings. I was sitting in a conference room at the offices of Sterling and Finch, the city's most aggressive probate law firm. Beside me was a stack of documents 3 inches thick, the result of an all-night session with my forensic accountant. Greg hadn't just dipped into the trust, he had drained it. Over 5 years, he had siphoned nearly $400,000 from my father's care fund. He had used it to prop up his failing dealerships, lease luxury cars, and fund Max's endless string of failed ventures. The investors Max bragged about, it was just his uncle's dementia medication money, laundered through a series of sloppy transfers. It's a clear-cut case of fiduciary breach and elder abuse, the lead attorney, a sharp woman named Alina, told me. The injunction is in place. We've petitioned for immediate removal of power of attorney. The Dister. Iked attorney is already building a case for the embezzlement. "What about the money?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "Can we recover it?" "We're going after his personal assets," Eleanor said. "The house, the cars, the dealership equity. It will take time, but we'll bleed him dry to make your father whole." I nodded. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. 3 weeks later, the news hit the local papers. Local dealership owner indicted for elder abuse and fraud. It was a small headline, but in our town, it was a nuclear bomb. Greg's reputation evaporated overnight. The dealership, already teetering on the edge of bankruptcy due to his mismanagement, went into receivership. They lost the house, the big, flashy colonial on the hill that Linda loved so much. They had to move into a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. A rental, I noted with grim satisfaction, that Apex Holdings did not manage. Max didn't fare much better. The internet is a fickle place. When word got out, leaked perhaps by a source close to the situation, that the real estate guru had tried to buy a penthouse with stolen money, his comment section turned into a war zone. He deleted his accounts 2 days later. The last I heard, he was working at a high-end gym, selling memberships. It wasn't real estate, but at least it was a job. I didn't speak to them. Linda called once, leaving a tearful voicemail begging me to drop the lawsuit for the sake of the family. I didn't delete it, but I didn't return it either. Protecting the abuser because of shared DNA is not loyalty, it's complicity. A month after the dinner, I drove out to Sunnyvale Estates, the assisted living facility where my father lived. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the lawn. I found Dad sitting on a bench near the koi pond, watching the fish swim in lazy circles. He looked frail, the disease was progressing. Some days he knew me, some days I was just a kind stranger. "Hey, Dad," I said softly, sitting down next to him. He turned slowly, his eyes milky and confused. Then a spark of recognition flickered. "Millie," he rasped, you're working late." "No, Dad," I smiled, taking his hand. It was papery and thin. "I'm done early today." Did you finish the spreadsheets for Greg?" he asked. He was stuck in a memory loop from 10 years ago. "I did better than that," I said, squeezing his hand. "I fired him." He blinked, processing this. A slow, mischievous smile spread across his face, the ghost of the man he used to be. "Good," he whispered. Always was a blowhard. You're the smart one, Millie, you're the shark." Tears pricked my eyes. Even through the fog, he saw me. "Yeah, Dad," I said, resting my head on his shoulder. "I'm the shark." "Are we okay?" he asked suddenly, a flash of anxiety crossing his face. "The money, are we okay?" I thought about the legal battles ahead. I thought about the bridge I had burned with the rest of the family. I thought about the lonely nights working until my eyes blurred to build an empire that no one knew about until it was necessary to use it as a weapon. Then I looked at the peace in his face, knowing he was safe, knowing that no one could ever threaten his care again. "We're okay, Dad," I said firmly. "We have plenty, you don't have to worry about a thing, I own the building." He patted my hand, satisfied, and turned back to watch the koi. I sat there with him for a long time, watching the water ripple. I wasn't the niece, or the cousin, or the poor relation anymore. I was Amelia Vance, CEO, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove it to anyone. The contract was signed, the keys were in my pocket, and the rent was paid in full.